through crisis, defining reality, talking about creating safety, predictability, and control. We talked 1 week about addressing unmet needs and how that's really key to helping people move through conflict and reactivity. We talked about the difference between compassion and empathy, empathy being something where we're crawling, sort of jumping into the suffering with other people, compassion being more like holding space and creating an understanding of the suffering. We've talked about ways to work with conflict during crisis and outside of crisis, and we've talked about building resiliency. And last week in particular, we talked about what reopening might look like and how to prepare for that as well. This week, we're going to move on to talking about really thriving during the next 18 months. And as we do that, before we do that, I want to just touch on our shared agreements for the group. Those of you who've been on every week know it well, but I'll just touch on them really quickly. Confidentiality, what stays here stays, what's said here stays here. API, which is assuming positive intent. Adapting. You'll hear lots of great ideas from us and from other people who are participating. You're free and welcome to take what works for you and sort of leave the rest and adapt it to work for your situation. Again, the wisdom is in the room. This is really about bringing our expertise to the table and then hearing from you all about what's working from you and creating really a shared learning environment. And then finally, like anything else in life, you get what you get from this is what you put into it. And so we encourage people to step up and participate, to ask questions, to put things in the chat, to participate in polls, because that's directly related to how much all of us learn from this opportunity. And so just real quickly, Danny referenced the next normal, and I want to talk about that for a second too. We've talked about the crisis curve several times already and talked about how there's different stages. And right now where we are is really in the stage of reconciliation, figuring out what life moving forward is going to look like, what may be left behind from before COVID, what things look like as we move forward, how to generate opportunities for our clients. As we go through that process, there's a lot of sorting through information. There's still some need to react to the urgent as well as thinking about the long term. And as we move into that part of the curve, different leadership will be needed. And so that's part of what Christine and Danny will be talking about in the next series if you guys want to participate in that. In the meantime, it's really important to remember that as we move forward with reconciliation, reconstruction, and it's really important to remember that we may go through this crisis curve again and again as there's new information. If something happens that feels really threatening or scary, or should the economic downturn continue, we may find ourselves going through many sort of mini curves, if you will, and it's helpful to understand that and realize that that's a really normal part of crisis, and to know that we can identify where we are in the crisis curve and adapt our behaviors accordingly. And so I think with that, Danny, you're going to talk a little bit about the next normal. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. And I want to call out, there's actually a typo on this slide. So we are going to be talking about the next normal and the next norms that go along with the next normal. But we're going to be talking about, as Lisa said, what we can expect as we're moving out of the pointed part of the crisis into the reconstruction and what we can look forward to over probably the next 18 months, actually. Recognizing that we're all in different places as we're coming out of this, and some of us have not come out of it in any way, shape, or form. But nonetheless, we're going to be talking about the next year and a half or so with the next normal. Specifically, we want to talk about three areas, three components of that next normal. The importance of having the right information, the importance of the right kind of leadership, and the importance of the right kind of innovation. So when we're talking about the right information, we're talking about a specific kind of information and the way we're receiving it and giving it that really should be paid attention to as we're going into the next normal. So there's going to be a lot of noise and reactivity, right? Folks are going to be coming out of this. You're going to be coming out of this wanting to either not talk about it or talk about it a lot, but it's going to be a lot of noise coming in and out. So it's critical now to focus on the right information for yourself, for your employees, for your clients, your board. So the short-term response in terms of the kinds of communication and information we want is really focusing on the long run, on the long arc. So as much as people want to talk about how it is right now, how wonderful, how bad, whatever, we want to continually pull people into the broader picture. In that, we want to make sure that we are having balanced information with diverse voices, really picking up on what people see as the again, what's happening right now, but more importantly, what are the trends that we can expect? What are the long-term predictions that we can make? And really having diverse two-way communication. When I say diverse, I'm meaning not only what people represent in terms of their ethnicity and all those other things that folks represent, but also in terms of their mindsets, their strengths. We want to make sure that we have clients that we're talking to, staff that we're talking to, other stakeholders, including donors and vendors, community partners, and also thought leaders out there in the industry. Now is the time to really be pulling in information and feeding it back and forth to those kinds of diverse stakeholders. We can do that through a whole bunch of different ways, including social media, advisory boards, a number of different ways. So this is where the innovation comes in. How will you give and receive information? And we also want to think about the kinds of, when we're talking about board members especially, and if you have the ability to influence and work with your board members, really consider seeing if you can tap into folks' strengths specifically that are very good about cutting the noise for themselves. These are folks that can be very specific around details. Those include lawyers, financial and business strategists, those kinds of really specific skill sets. And also your philanthropic connections. Those are also the folks that we want to tap into. What are they seeing? What are they noticing? What can they expect over the next 18 months? So again, bring people into the now, but with a longer arc vision. And then secondly, we want to talk about leadership, specifically leadership in terms of making sure that we're in the growth mindset, meaning that we're not in the mindset of what we can't do. Instead, we're in the mindset of what we can do. Keeping an eye on the longer arc, making sure that we're getting clear on what the plan is to move through the next 12 to 18 months. All this, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that we are practicing compassionate leadership. And we talked a lot about compassion and the importance of that in our previous sessions. And that's essentially where folks are feeling seen, valued, and heard. Now is more important, probably more important than it has been in the past, for folks to feel like they have a voice in what will happen next and how to understand what will happen next. We want to make sure that we're resetting expectations so that folks understand this is a new normal. We want to make sure that we're clear on making sure that we can measure things and our goals are specific. And lastly, practicing compassionate leadership, we want to bring people together over and over again. So as you're pulling people into this new normal and folks are scattered, bring them in together. And that's some of the work that Christina and I will be talking about when we have our new learning series. But you know how to do this. Bring people together in ways that you know how to do. And then our third is innovation. We talked a little bit about this in our last session, but we wanted to spend a little bit more time on it specifically today, talking about making sure that as you're thinking about how to, God, and I'm starting to hate this word, but how to pivot, if you need to pivot, how you want to innovate, you want to know what is happening and how are we going to continually stay aware. You want to make sure you have the right people, the right diverse people at the table as you're thinking about how to innovate and pivot. You want to make sure that you have the right questions to ask, and we're going to tell you a little bit about that in just a moment. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, how can you change you?
Thank you, Danny. You brought up some really great points, such as that decision-making. Who needs to be at the table? Danny brought up a great point of pivoting can be kind of exhausting to hear after time after time. But it's a really great thing to think about. Pivoting actually means, what's your next opportunity to grow? As an organization, how do you make the decisions and who do you need to bring to that table to be part of it? Who's able to see what's the new growth direction for your organization, your new way of connecting with people. Those innovation opportunities are plentiful when we're in crisis. It's just sometimes we have a hard time seeing them. And that's where creating that diverse voice at the table from all the different aspects that Danny mentioned is going to be vital for you being able to see all the opportunities that you have ahead of you as an organization. And so ask yourself, who's at the table and who needs to be at the table? Is there a missing voice, maybe a more competitive voice, who can look at things and look for those next opportunities for your organization and be really excited about being able to see what are other people really capitalizing on here? And then how will these decisions be made? Is it largely staff driven? Is it largely driven by your board of directors? Who's really helping to make the final decision within your organization? Because often they should be looped in early and consistently so that you're gaining their buy-in along the decision-making track. And that's where we get to guiding questions. Those guiding questions absolutely need to be going to all decision makers. Those decision makers are the ones who need to have a big part and feel ownership in those guiding questions and those ideation pieces of where you're going. So here are a few of the particularly impactful guiding questions that we see as really impactful. One, why do we think these are still the right services? Sometimes we can get a little attached to certain services and they may not actually be meeting our needs anymore. We keep certain things like services or products in our organizations because they're habit, or we feel like, yeah, well, but we do them all the time. But are you doing them all the time because they're actually comfortable, or you just know how to fit them in? Or are they truly meeting the need of who you're serving? Can we structure our services for flexibility? There's a high likelihood that in this long-term arc, we're going to see a lot of people realizing that they can do a lot more things virtually than ever before, and they can get comfortable with it. That's going to ask different things of us as service providers, that we have to think about things in a new way. Maybe somebody doesn't want to take a bus all the way across town to get to your service because that has a cost, that has a huge time consumption for them. So are there flexible pieces that you can build into your structure and model that reaches more people or reaches them more consistently and creates a lot more flexibility for people to be able to opt into your services in your organization? Then thinking about what resources do you have to leverage? Are there resources that maybe were only kind of accessed before that could be grown or made more visible? Or do you need more time for certain ones? Or which services do you currently have that are maybe huge consumers of individual staff time? Thinking about each of these helps us to really think through where we're going, what can be kind of readjusted to create greater opportunities for our organizations. A lot of times what we see is it's also a great time to kind of go through and really filter what has been serving us and what did we just not have the time to slow down and look at closely. So we've been maybe carrying it around as one of our services or one of our products, or there may be a really hefty kind of administration aspect to certain services that we can take the chance now and see it as a pivot opportunity to adjust and maybe refine so that it's not as heavy of a lift for those team members that you have. Other ones to really focus on are thinking about what are those opportunities for growth and improvement? Is there one product or service that you kind of go, yeah, we do that, but we don't do it super well, right? Those are great things to look at now and go, should this be cut? Or should this be improved while we have the opportunity to reintroduce it in this phase? Can we build it up? Can we build it out? Can we make it something that people are thrilled to come to us for? And also thinking about, is there something that we can do that improves revenue? Or is there something that we can surprise and delight our clients and community partners with? Can we create opportunities for them? Do you have new partnership opportunities that you can reach out to people? Remember that right now, people who maybe were not viable partners before are way more accessible than ever before because of this huge shift. So looking at that as who do you want to rebuild with is a crucial question to be asking yourself at the moment. So we're going to take this into our breakouts. And what I want you to do is when you go into your breakout, first, be sure that you name who's going to be your presenter, who's going to share the takeaways from your group when we come back together. And then the questions I want you to discuss in your group are who needs to be at the table for innovation conversations in your organization? Who are those decision makers? Who has a really unique view? Who maybe has really great connections to community partners that they could access more easily right now than they ever could before? And then what are the critical questions that will free the team up for innovation? Is there something that you can kind of take some mental roadblocks down for them? Is there a way to really start asking the tough questions that help us get creative, that help your team think about it in a new way? Because it's so easy to sometimes go, yeah, but we tried that 6 years ago and it didn't go as planned, right? And that's us closing a door instead of looking at it as, it was a very different world 6 years ago. Let's look at what would have had to be tweaked for us to learn from it and maybe find a new way to implement that in a better way if it's a service we really care about or really wish we could offer.
All right. Christina, would you like me to put the questions from that other slide in the chat so people have them while they're in the chat room?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll do that right now for people.
And I'm gonna put in real quick our,
and how long do people have in the chat room?
Yep, we're gonna do about 10 minutes in the chat, and then we'll come out and debrief for about 10 minutes.
Okay, and I'm putting the questions in right now.
Perfect.
Don't go anywhere, folks. Make sure you come back. We have more content after the breakout room. So
oh yeah,
I'll make sure to keep you on board.
And then I also just sent the 2 questions to discuss. And I'm going to move you into 7 different rooms. So make sure that if you get a little pop-up that asks you if you want to move to your breakout room, click accept. Here we go.
We'll see you soon.
okay, this time I said later, so I'm not in the breakout room.
Okay, perfect. I'm just waiting for a couple more people to head to their breakout rooms.
Is about how to really innovate and be responsive to your clients' needs over the next 18 months. One of the things that I've learned in working with organizations over during crisis, it's one thing to have great ideas about how to change, but the key is really how to institute the change. And so crisis is no different than normal life in some ways. The first thing is thinking about really effective change management, right? And so the chart you have in front of you, and we'll send you a copy of this, by the way, after we're done today, talks about building sort of the case for change. Why does change need to happen? And then having sort of the coalition of the willing, if you will, to change. And I find that during a crisis, people are much more willing because the usual customary things that keep people feeling like they're sort of safe and secure and they've got a good gig going are gone. And so people are much more willing to look at change and adapt. And then really having a compelling vision. What are you working towards? What is all this about? That energizes everybody and is a really incredible source of resiliency, which we talked about in this in these sessions as well. And then there's a piece about, is sort of in the middle, you see those 5 circles in the middle, and it says execution happens in these domains. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but there's some really concrete things that need to happen inside the organization in order for the change to be sustainable. So we'll come back to that in a second, but after that, or along with that, making sure that you build the change or the change process so that there's early wins and that you're able to advertise those wins and share those with people, especially during a crisis. It's really critically important that people see that their efforts make a difference, even if it's small things. It can be everything from completing your checklist in a day to the small impact you might have on a client one particular day. And then after that, really, evaluating what's happening, making sure that you're hitting your intended market or your intended target, really, and your goals, and adjusting as you need to, because no change process is perfect. And there's always things that you don't anticipate, things that you don't know. So evaluating how you're doing and making adjustments, and then you just keep going. And so on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about what those 4 or 5 domains are. And what we've discovered over time, 25 years of working with organizations, consulting through crisis and non-crisis, is that if you want to make lasting change in an organization, you need to make change in 4 different domains in the organization. The first is knowledge and skills. And so that can be everything from what is the information we have, like we talked about today. It's really critically important to have the right information and to have it to the right degree, to focus on certainly the things you need to respond to in real time, but also that long view. That's a good example, but also making sure that you have the right information and that you have the people at the table have the right skills to be able to decipher that information. So that's the first domain, that knowledge and skills. The second is the systems. And we're going to talk about the systems in a minute, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. The third is intrapersonal, and that is where the leadership starts in all of us, really, that willingness to look at ourselves and see how we need to grow and change and see ourselves as other people see us and see those opportunities and the things that we're called to in this new environment. What is asked of me now in this new environment as a leader? What is asked of me as a human being? That's the interpersonal level. And anytime you want to make a change in your life, there's always some intrapersonal piece you need to work on. And the fourth is interpersonal, the pieces that are between human beings. And again, when you want to make changes in a human being, you find that you have to change how people are working together. It could be work processes. It could be everything from what information people are sharing to who's at the table to whether people have the right skills to really maneuver through difficult conversations, whether people have the right skills to have a conversation about what gets left off, what do we leave behind, do we really need to be having these conversations, do we really need to be doing these services? Those are all interpersonal skills that call on people to show up in different ways. And one of the things that's sort of exciting about the work that Christina and Danny are going to be starting or launching, the series they're going to be launching, and they will be back in touch with you about, is that they're really going to focus on the intrapersonal and the interpersonal. We have been focusing somewhat on that, but we've also talked a lot in this series about knowledge and skills and systems. And so I'll talk real quickly about the systems piece though. And so systems are all the things, one of the ways people talk about them is the horizontals in an organization. They're sort of all the things that keep everything moving. And that could be everything from the people systems, HR, for example, to leadership development, to how the organization is structured. For example, if you want to have a nimble organization and you have a hierarchical decision-making structure, that's not going to work. You're not going to be able to pivot and react in real time or change in real time. Policies and procedures often need to change to enforce those changes. Communication, of course, is always pivotal or key in any process. And then even looking at how you work, you may need to work more cross-functionally or cross-functionally in very certain places of the organization. And then always looking to see, are we hitting our target? Are we, continuous quality improvement means always evaluating, are we hitting our target? Are we doing what we thought we were going to do? Are we doing it the way we thought we're going to do? How successful are we, and what improvements do we need to make? And then finally, even looking at things as simple as facilities and equipment. Where are you? Where are your facilities? Do you need to have in-person facilities? Is it a barrier to your clients if you require them to come in? What kind of equipment do our employees need if we're working more virtually? Does everybody need a laptop and a cell phone that has access to Wi-Fi? You know, some really simple things like that. All of those things need to be looked at. While that list is not exhaustive, it is a good starting point for thinking about how do we really support these changes and bake them into the organization so they're successful and sustainable over the long run. And so we're close to time here, and we want to be really respectful of time. So just to remind people, if you want to download the chat, and I know there was a lot of good ideas in the chat, you just click the 3 dots that are at the bottom of the chat box and hit Save Chat with your cursor. We will be following up with you, sending you a link to this recording, as well as some PDFs of specific tools. So all the system stuff we talked about today, as well as the innovation questions, will be coming to you. I do want to say those are a little bit behind schedule. Usually they go out the day of. They may not get to you until later this week, but they will be coming to you. And then just want to preview that next week we're going to really talk about how to create a culture that supports the kind of continual innovation and change you're going to need to be thinking about and really showing up for in the next 18 months. And then what kind of leadership do you need to have for yourself and to develop in your team to be able to really show up and be your best? So that's what you have to look forward to next week. Watch your email for follow-up from this week and for a reminder for next week. And if you're not signed up for next week, feel free to sign up through the Eventbrite link. We do ask people to sign up because we have limited slots. I think Zoom has limited capacity, and so we want to make sure that we're able to accommodate everybody who's interested. So I'm going to turn it over to Danny and to Christina, see if you have any final thoughts at all.
Sure. We would also love to hear from you. All of us would love to link in with you if you want. We're sharing additional information there as things evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Danny and I will also be, sharing more about where the direction of kind of the next series is going. That's to help refine some of those skills and really help support moving through what that next normal means to leaders. And so be sure to connect with all of us and keep an eye out. And Danny, do you have anything to add?
No, just we're delighted and so grateful that you could all join us. We're another meme that's out there, but we really are in this together as leaders of organizations that are really trying to, or are changing the world. It's incumbent on us to keep working on this. So you pat yourselves on the back, accept a big gold star that we're pushing into your foreheads, and join us next week. And we look forward to connecting with you, as Christina said, on LinkedIn and through our websites.
Okay, thank you, everybody.